Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
All right. So Dean Riccio, we could go in a number of different directions. I kind of want to go through your career a bit. I know you're in private practice for about 16 years before you became Dean, and then obviously now you're back in private practice.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that 16 years. What kind of work were you doing in private practice?
So I after my clerkship, I joined a law firm that was a spin-off of a law firm at the time, Shanley and Fisher, which back in those days was considered a big law firm. They had about 30 lawyers in it. And the founding partner of the law firm was Don Robinson, who was a partner at Shanley and Fisher, who invited me. I was a law clerk at the time to join the firm. So I served my clerkship in federal court, joined the firm, and did mostly litigation, trial and appellate work, complete gamut of different kinds of cases that I had at the time. One that sticks out was one of the first cases I actually handled on my own. I represented a psychiatrist in Hackensack who was bringing in kids who had emotional problems, and he would make them part of their family. That was his philosophy, was to bring them into his family. And the town of Hackensack said, you can't do that because you're not a family, which raised the question of, well, how do you define family constitutionally? Does it have to be blood, marriage, or adoption, or could it be something else? So we litigated that for a while, and ultimately we resolved the litigation, but then the legislature started enacting laws protecting group homes. So that case was sort of a precursor to the concept of group homes that we now have in New Jersey. So that was one of the cases I worked on at the time. Handled a number of securities cases involving 10b-5, 10b-6, SEC enforcement actions and things like that. That was a big part of the practice. But it was a general civil practice, a couple of criminal cases, one involving immunity and the difference between use immunity and transactional immunity. I had a case that I think it went, I'm not sure if it went to the Supreme Court or not. I can't remember that far back. But it involved John J. Kenney, who was a Hudson County Democratic leader who got indicted, and then he was cooperating with the government, and the question was whether or not the immunity that he received was transactional or use. So those were the kinds of cases we had back then.
So 16 years of that in private practice.
Yeah.
And then I think you said you got to kind of this fork in the road where either you could have gone federal judgeship or become a dean at Seton Hall?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I can't say that the federal judgeship was an absolute certainty, but it was close to that.
So you must have done something right in that 16 years. And I always thought of dean of a law school as somewhat, I don't know if political is the best term for it, but you have to have met some of the right people, done some of the right things along the years. Do you mind talking about that a little bit and how you got in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I had a number of clients who had influence politically on the federal and state level, who were willing to help me. What happened to me in 87, 88, is I wasn't feeling satisfied in what I was doing. It wasn't really burnout. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. It was just like I'd go home at night and I think, well, how did I really improve things in the world today? And when you're representing clients, individuals, the sense of self-satisfaction is lost. And I wanted to do something else. Seton Hall Law School at the time was on shaky grounds. They needed a new building. The faculty was in disarray. The ABA was threatening to pull accreditation. And I was approached by some of the leaders at Seton Hall about my interest in becoming the dean. And I thought naively that if the top people are approaching me, that it's done. But so I said, yeah, I made a decision that I would rather do that than become a federal judge. And what I didn't know was that I had to go through this faculty interview process. And had I known that, I'm not sure I would have done it. But in any event, we went through the faculty approval process. The faculty approved me after months of interviews, and that's when I left to become the dean. And I credit my wife with not objecting to it, because it probably cut my income in half.
That's what
I was thinking the same thing. I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Maybe more than half. And when I left, I was at the peak, or approaching the peak of earning power. But I've never made a decision in my life based on money. And that would be one example of that. And I mean, if you ask my wife what my slogan is when it comes to money, it's always God will provide. and I can tell you, so far it's worked. So I have no regrets doing what I did, and the satisfaction I got out of it. The difference between practicing law and being the dean of a law school or a professor at a law school is you can affect the life of a person in a minute, in a heartbeat. Whereas in the practice of law, you could represent a client for 1,000 hours and accomplish nothing.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
That was a big deal. I recall one instance, it was right around graduation time, and a young woman student came in to see me. She was about to graduate, and I recognized her, but I wasn't really close to her in the sense that I was involved in her life as a student in the same way that I might have been with others. And she said, I just wanted to come in and thank you for what you did for me. And of course I said, well, you're more than welcome, but not knowing what it was for. And she went on and on about how much it influenced her life. And I didn't, to this day, I still don't know what it is. But she gave me a little paperweight, which I keep. And it's the slogan on it is, no act of kindness, however small, goes unnoticed. I'll never forget that. And that's why I'm telling the story now, that you don't know when you're in a position like the dean of a law school or a professor, you don't know how you can impact a person with a minimal amount of effort. And that's always been something that's affected me in a positive way, because I like to think, or I try to influence people I come into contact with and make their life a little better through my effort. That's to me is one of the things that motivates me.
I went to Catholic school my whole life, including through law school, Fordham Jesuits. What's Seton Hall? Are they
Diocesan?
They're diocesan. It's a diocesan priest, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I bought most of the Catholic education, hook, line, and sinker. But I remember one thing that stuck with me is, when we die and we're in heaven, the first will be last and the last will be first, and that kind of thing. Yeah. And the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the poor in spirit, this kind of thing. And I kind of carried that with me, that you never know, like I never looked down on anyone, like, oh, that person, because in my view, everyone has like a certain level of equality of humanity and deserve a certain amount of respect no matter who they are. And I never play that sort of class game or whatever. As the sun just starts to shine on my face.
And you start levitating for those that are listening.
Let me just, there's a couple of thoughts I want to share.
Yeah. I might start levitating.
Yeah.
About what motivates me. I mean, I learned a number of lessons. My mother always taught me about loyalty to friendship, loyalty of friendship, and that you don't drop your friends when bad things happen, because that's the test of true friendship.
Yeah.
And my father used to say, Don't think that anybody is better than you.
Yeah.
But don't think that you're better than anybody else. And that's kind of levels the playing field.
Yeah.
And then from my own perspective, I like the idea of all that really matters in life is what we do for others. That in the circle of life, you never take more than you give, and that it's in giving that we receive. Those are 5 simple thoughts, which it took me a long time to understand and to rattle them off just the way I did.
Yeah.
But as you get older, you start to, they call it wisdom. I'm not sure it's wisdom. I think you just see things more clearly. And those 5 kind of points are the way I look at things. And it's really kind of the way in which I functioned as a lawyer in the beginning, as the dean, and then as a professor, and now.
That's awesome. Can you talk about, mindful of that, so you come on, it's 1988 when you
Yes.
became dean? What's going on with Seton Hall at that time? I think you'd started talking about some of it.
The faculty is in disarray. The ABA came in for an accreditation, and usually what you do is you give the ABA committee one report, and they had 2 reports from different faculty members. Okay, so this is almost unheard of. 2 separate reports, one portraying the law school in one light, the other portraying it in the exact opposite. There was a building problem. The building needed a new building.
Where was it housed at this point?
In Newark.
On
on
the
Raymond
same
Boulevard.
same footprint?
Same footprint, pretty
Okay,
much. Yeah.
got it.
Okay.
And the financial arrangement was disproportionate. The money that was coming into the law school was getting siphoned to the university, not kept by the law school for law school purposes. So these were sort of the center for the clinics were not functioning at a high level. The curriculum needed reform. And the ABA came in and basically told the administration at the time, your accreditation is in jeopardy. So that was the posture of the law school in 1987. So when I was given the opportunity to apply to become the dean, I liked the fact that there was a lot to be done, because you could point to a beginning,
Yeah.
and then at the end you could say, okay, here's where it was, here's where it is now. I did not want to be a caretaker.
It's like taking over a bad basketball team.
There
or
you
something.
go. Very similar. By the way, in 1989 was my first year as dean.
Carlissimo.
And we went not just to the Final Four, but the Final 2, and lost on a terrible call by the ref. So I've always taken credit for the fact that the '89 basketball team coincided with my first year as dean. But so that was the situation that I came into, and my first year, all I did was get to know the ins and outs of law school and all the personalities. I spent time with every single person. There was no email. So, but I didn't care. Even if there was, I would have done it the same way. But basically I had to establish relationships with people so that they would have confidence in me and trust in me.
Yeah, reading kind of your bio a little bit, and there's some great articles out there about you. It looks like you had a big time open door policy. You're having lunch with students and things like that. How important was that to you, the relationship with
it was
students?
critical. It was critical. Everybody knew that if there was a student waiting to see me and I was doing non-student related business, even with a faculty member or the associate dean, I would stop that meeting and the student would come in and would take care of the problem.
And so you're teaching at this time as well, right? You're dean and you're, what was it? It was con law.
In the beginning, it was civil procedure because that's what I knew best. Now, before I started teaching con law, I wanted to teach con law, but we had a professor at the time, a legendary con law professor named Gene Gressman. He was the co-author of this book, Supreme Court Practice, which is the Bible for Supreme Court practice. So I said, I'm going to take Gene's course. So as the dean of the law school, it was a first-year course, I used to take his course. And I sat in the back of the room.
I really want to know what grade he
I was
gave
going to
you,
say,
but
did you
keep
make it
going.
pass
Keep
fail?
So
going.
I had an understanding with him. I said, Gene, don't you call on me, But I audited his course for a year before I started teaching con law, and I felt that in order for me to be a good dean, president of the law school, I needed to prove to everybody that I could be a top-notch teacher. And then the byproduct of that was I got to know the students. And if there was a problem that occurred, usually I knew the students on a first-name basis, and I was able to solve the problem, and it worked. It worked.
What was that transition like from litigation for 16 years, to academia?
It was refreshing.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it feels like kind of
Refreshing.
the deadlines, the hamster wheel, the motion, the paper.
I used to, well, if I had a class to teach and the central administration wanted me to go to a meeting, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I have a course
Figure it
to
out
teach.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I used to go and do a lot of my class prep, final class prep. I would go into the library, and the students would see me there. They would see me open the book, reading the cases, taking my notes, doing the preparation, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it became something that was known. And people looked to that and say, look, the dean is doing, what we're doing. So,
You seem like a big lead by example guy and
Yeah.
don't ask others to do something you wouldn't do yourself.
100%.
Wow. So what's kind of your legacy with being dean at Seton Hall? Like you talked about, and I'll let you answer, but I know one of the big things was you ultimately got a new building, and it's a beautiful building. I know because I walked by it for 3 years and said,
Yeah.
wow, it looks like a nice law school.
But the building, a lot of people give me credit for that. And I'll take some of the credit, but there were a lot of other people involved in that. To me, my legacy was creating the culture to make it clear that the students mattered more than anything else, to provide an academic program that was rigorous but sensitive at the same time. They're not inconsistent. You can be a very rigorous teacher, but sensitive and compassionate. Willing to provide opportunities to people to prove themselves, not being concerned with the trappings of a law school, but with the substance of it, making sure that the students that went to Seton Hall Law School were given the opportunity to be better people coming out of the law school and when they went in, creating a family environment at the law school. I mean, I think to me, if that continues to today, and I think it does, then I would make that more my legacy than the building.
And it seems like it was reciprocated there, the relationship you have. You were teacher of the year, was it 5 times?
Yeah.
And I'll tell my mom taught 5th grade. She just retired. But that teacher of the year thing,
Yeah.
I know firsthand in education, they care very much about that. Like that's a big deal.
It is a very big deal. When we started doing that, and it was an anonymous vote, and to me it was validation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came there. In the back of my mind, I'm remembering the teacher telling me, "You have no business being the dean of the law school. You taught 3rd grade CCD." To me, that was validation that I had accomplished what I set out to accomplish, because you can't control that. You can't rig it. You either are or you aren't. And I worked hard at it. Every single class was prepared as meticulously as I could. Everything was scripted out. And in the classroom itself, I tried to make it entertaining. I tried to give practical examples of the legal principles that I was teaching, especially in civil procedure. So many things that are second nature to both of
Sure.
you guys. To any practicing lawyer, it's not that hard. But if you're teaching discovery, you're teaching summary judgment, you're teaching motion practice, things like that, you're able to give examples, and the students understood that, and they paid attention to it.
Yeah, we usually say it's Jed over there, our IT guy for the day, is going to law school next year. I told him, I was like, it's kind of like you're learning an entirely new language. Like we talk now about, res judicata, joinder, interrogatories, all of that. We know exactly what we're talking about. But civil procedure, that's something that if you're going in entry-level law school, you're like, what? So.
Well, a couple of things that I really zeroed in on was legal writing, which was a pet peeve of mine, even to this day, because I think most legal writing that I see is not of the quality that it should be. I was a big supporter of the Center for Social Justice. One of the things that came up when I became the dean was whether or not to build the law school building in Newark or whether to move to an office building in Roseland and convert it.
Like a lot of the those big Newark law firms were moving out of Newark to Roseland. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Newark was considered to be a dangerous and undesirable location.
Yeah.
And my feeling was, and this was backed up by the leadership of Seton Hall, that if we are, number one, a Catholic law school, okay, which we are, if we're committed to serving the underserved, then you're not going to do it in the suburbs. You're going to do it where they're located.
Yeah.
And I got behind that 100%. One of the programs I started was I convinced students to do pro bono work for no academic credit. It's easy for somebody to say, okay, we want you to do some clinical work, but you're going to get 3 credits for it. No. If you want to do pro bono work, you get nothing for it by way of credit other than the satisfaction of helping somebody who needs your services. Yeah. So at graduation, we would give certificates to students who did the pro bono program, and there would be over 100 every year. So that was gratifying. The inter-school moot court program, we used to send our students out to participate in moot court competitions against other schools, and we gave them practically no support, no coaching, no real financing. I said, this isn't right. Yeah. If we're going to do this, we have to make sure our team's ready to go. So I hired a person who was the coach. I got involved in it myself. And Seton Hall now has one of the top inter-school moot court programs in the country.
Wow.
How is the the legal market varied over the years? I remember when I was applying to law school in 97, 94, no, 95, 94. I remember a lot of people would say, what do you want to go to law school for? There's too many lawyers. You're not going to get a job. And what I concluded was that, well, a lawyer, being a lawyer, that's like saying don't go into business because there's too many businesses out there. I always felt like, well, I'll be a good lawyer and I'll be valuable to someone. And so I just went anyway. But how has it fluctuated over the years? And I've seen, like, when we put an ad in for resumes, some years we get flooded, some years we get less. How have you seen that over the years at the law school? And what sort of things did you do to make sure that the kids got jobs or at least help where you could?
Sure. It does fluctuate, but my feeling of employment opportunities is that there's always room at the top for good students. So rule number one is not necessarily your grades, but put forth your best effort in law school. Whatever that turns out to be, that will translate into something. So that was sort of rule number one. Don't come to me and say, I can't get a job because I'm not in the top third of the class. That's not the reason you're not getting a job, okay? There's other factors at play here. So position yourself so that you can say to yourself, I did my very best to secure employment. That was number one. Number two was I set up a placement department, and just about every law school has it these days. So they would bring in law firms that would interview people for summer employment. The third thing I would do, because I was a New Jersey lawyer and had some connections, I became a one-man employment agency. And I did. And I would help kids get clerkships or at least interviews for jobs. I also was able to make inroads into the New York market because back in those days, the big New York firms were not interested in Seton Hall students. So what I would do,
Even top of the class when law review ones?
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. So what I would do is I had some connections in New York because when I was doing the securities work, I got to know a lot of New York lawyers at big law firms. So I would call up somebody that I would know at Paul Weiss or Cravath or Sullivan and Cromwell or any of those major firms. And I would say, I have a student here who I want you to hire as a summer person. I said, I want you to do me a favor. I put it just that way. Take this person.
Yeah.
All right, take my word for it. And I would send them somebody who I knew was going to dazzle them. And every time I did that, it worked. And what it did was it opened the door for others. And to this day now, we have partners from Seton Hall at these major New York firms. And that's how it happened. You had to use your personal relationships to call in a favor, to give this person a chance, and it worked.
Yeah.
How does getting into school work? Because I have kids that apply to law school or undergrad, and it's always funny. It's kind of like, okay, the top of the class kid will get an offer at a mediocre school, whether it be law school or undergrad, but they're going to get a full ride, and then, okay, they're going to get into the school, but they're not going to get money, So how does that interplay work in terms of the success of an institution like that, in terms of, I guess, the endowment, they call it, in terms of the money that can be contributed to lower the cost of the tuition versus the caliber of student you get in? And like, I always thought when my kids were applying to undergrad that the big thing for the school is they wanted to get their acceptance rate up so that the amount of offers they put out vis-a-vis the amount of people that accept, they have, like, that's a competing number. They want to get that ratio up high. Can you talk a little bit about how all that works and the dynamics of scholarships and why is the school trying to get better students as opposed to just,
This is one of my favorite topics. One of the worst things that has happened to law schools is the rankings, such as U.S. News and World Report, which in my opinion is worthless because it's based on surveys of people who really don't know a thing about the law schools they're surveying. Now, there are other data that they use, but law students or future law students look heavily at the U.S. News and World Ranking and other rankings. So in order to boost your ranking, you need to tailor your admissions policies to criteria that will help your ranking.
Right.
One of those criteria are LSAT scores. Equally, in my opinion, nearly worthless. Okay, U.S. News is worthless.
Yeah.
LSAT scores nearly worthless.
Yeah.
So you have two factors that go into admissions decisions that I don't consider to be particularly relevant.
Wait, what's funny? So we had on the podcast, we had Ed Capozzi, okay? Ed Capozzi he's sort of a street guy in a way. He was in a band for many years, and he is, like if you saw him at a bar, you wouldn't think he's a lawyer, but he's one of the most successful plaintiff's trial lawyers in the state. He gets big verdicts. He gets a lot of verdicts. And I've also seen in my career, like, you'll be at trial or we'll be at a motion hearing and we'll be doing a case. And then some kid from like a white shoe law firm, those big law firms, will come in and they could be like scared of their own shadow, don't really know how to talk necessarily, like don't have that sort of street practicality sort of aspect. But anyway, interrupted you.
Yeah, well, no, that's and I'll bet you didn't have a high LSAT score either.
No, he probably did because he probably had a big LSAT, and because he probably went to a big one of the big
Are
law.
you talking about Capozzi?
Yes,
Talking about the
Capozzi.
street
Well,
lawyer.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, one of the things I did in the beginning,
Actually, he didn't tell us his LAT score, but yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
I've never had a client ask me my LSAT score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only people that ever asked that were admissions people at law school, and that's about it. I don't think even law firms during the interview process
No.
care about it.
I always felt like just get in and then forget about that.
I used to, in the first couple of years, there would be, say, 15 kids that were on the fence.
Yeah.
Right? You don't know whether to admit them or not. So I told the admissions person, I want to interview those people. And I did. I would, as the dean, I would interview 15 people that were on the fence. And you would be amazed. In minutes, you knew who should get the opportunity and who should not.
It's the same thing with hiring. I feel like sometimes you know within.
But here's what I did. Those who got offered admission and accepted it, which was everybody, every semester they would have to come to me and tell me what their grades were. So I tracked I did this for like 3 years, and maybe there were 10 kids. I tracked those 10 kids for their law school career. Everyone passed the bar first time.
Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. And they may not have gotten the opportunity to attend Seton Hall Law School, maybe somewhere else, had it not been for the time that was spent interviewing them. Now, it's probably not practical for do that, but it's not impossible either.
Yeah.
You know, and instead of just looking at an application form with a GPA, a major, an LSAT score, and a personal statement, which nowadays AI could probably crank out great personal statements. Instead of just looking at the paper, look at the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it take time? Yes, but you're dealing with people's lives.
Can you pull the veil away from the admissions process a little bit? I always wonder, I mean, at least in undergrad, it's like, yeah, they got, I don't know, 50,000 applicants or 10,000 applicants.
Yeah.
How is it actually done? Is there a committee? Is there, like, what kind of TLC actually goes into looking at so many applications and files?
The way I did it, and I don't know how they're doing it now, I explained one of the things was I personally interviewed people. That's not realistic. I don't think anybody's doing that these days. But every law school, I would think, has an admissions department, and you'll have admissions officers. You'll have a dean of admissions, and then they'll have a staff. Yeah. And their job is to go through the applications and to filter them out. I fear that there's probably some automatic admits and some automatic denials. Yeah. And then you're going to have the great middle class, right? And those are the ones, the automatic denials. You got a kid with a 2.0 and a 140 LSAT.
Yeah.
Okay? That person probably shouldn't go to law school anywhere. Not always, but probably not. Then you're going to have another kid with a 170 LSAT and a 3.8 GPA. That person's going to get admitted. But then you're going to have the middle, the 158 to 160 LSAT, the 3.3 to 3.5 GPA, and then you've got most of your applicants are going to look something like that.
Yeah.
So how do you separate them? And depends on how much time the schools are willing to invest in that process.
How much does the right letter of recommendation matter with that stuff?
You always have letters of recommendation or what do they call it? Alumni relations. Father or mother went to the law school, and that's going to get some extra weight, but it's not determinative.
Yeah.
And what I used to do is, I see you have a yellow pad in front of you. You don't see that many days anymore. But I used to keep a yellow pad, and every person, every student who was applying to law school who had a sponsor who I felt needed to get the courtesy of a response, I would put the name of the students down and the sponsor. And before the decision was made, I would make a call to that person and explain so-and-so's being admitted, so-and-so's not being admitted.
Yeah.
as a courtesy. What I didn't do is I didn't admit or I didn't overrule admission or denial decisions based on connections.
Yeah.
That I didn't do. I didn't think it was right.
Like I always wondered, like if you have someone who's in that middle class, and then you see just a crazy hypothetical, like, okay, Barack Obama wrote this person a letter recommendation.
Yeah.
Is that going to really be the one that you say, nah, he's on the fence, or is that going to be like, guys, look at this?
What I would have done if I got a letter of recommendation, or more likely a phone call.
Well, Mark, for the record, I got letters of recommendation from Bob Dole,
Okay.
and I got rejected at Harvard, Columbia, and NYU.
All right.
All right, so
Well, that was a mistake on their part, right?
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah,
Because you're proof that it was a mistake. But the point is that the decision was not improperly influenced,
yeah.
and that's
Okay.
the right way it should be.
All right. Because all right, interesting.
All right. So where does the money come from that helps to reduce the tuition rates? How does that work? Scholarship money, that is. And what can people do that want to contribute to that to try
We're putting you back in your dean seat.
Yeah.
Well, there are scholarships. Okay, there's a scholarship that has my name on it. In fact, a good friend of mine just donated $10,000 to that scholarship fund. But what happens is that with the scholarship, the named scholarship funds, you're only going to get a percentage of what's there. So if you got $200,000 in the fund and you're giving out $3,000 a year, because that's you're giving out a small percentage of it because you want to keep the principal intact.
Yeah.
It's not that meaningful. The full scholarships, the law schools just absorb it. The higher rated incoming students will go to school for free, and those students who are not at that same level may pay the full tuition. It's not necessarily unfair because the higher rated student must have done something to distinguish themselves from the other person. That's not always the case. One of the things that we had, that I started, is after first year, if a student who was paying the full tuition had a really great first year, we would then give them a tuition break, because even though they didn't get it coming in, they've earned it.
Yeah.
So you try to do that, but at the same time, if you're a tuition-driven school, which Seton Hall is and many others are, then you need to pay the bills.
Yeah. And one of the criticisms I've heard of law schools generally over the years is that it's all theory. You're not really learning anything to be a lawyer practically. Did you come across that and do anything to kind of deal with that?
Yeah. My approach was
like the rule of perpetuities. Like, have you ever used the rule of perpetuities?
The fertile octogenarian.
Yeah, or the fertile octogenarian rule. Have you ever used that?
I have never.
By the way,
used it.
God bless Paula Franzese. She was my real estate professor freshman year at Fordham Law School, and she was great. I think I might have had a crush on her at some point in law school.
You and many others.
Yeah.
Paula is a great teacher.
Yeah.
Great teacher and scholar, without a doubt. You needed to blend the theory and the practice.
Yeah.
That's what you needed to do. I felt very capable of doing that because I had practiced. Most of the time, the higher rated faculty when I was at Dean were people who had practiced. Not always, but some of our adjunct professors,
Yeah.
Judges and practicing lawyers, would come in and their rankings would be great.
I always found the adjuncts were way more interesting
100%.
than the dude that clerked for the U.S. Supreme Court and never practiced and went right into it.
Not to generalize, because I can think of a couple of Seton Hall professors who did not practice, but who are great teachers. But when you have the practical experience, it makes it so much easier.
It was so funny. I remember I was taking trial advocacy at Fordham, and the trial advocacy professor was he was a real criminal defense lawyer, and I remember I was practicing my direct examination or something as first year or second year, I forget what it was, maybe even third year. And I was like, well, wherefore tau? I was like talking like a lawyer, and the guy, he stops me, he goes, why'd you ask the question that way? I'm like, what do you mean why'd I ask the question that way? Because I'm a lawyer, that's how I'm supposed to ask it. And he's like, do you talk like that in normal life? I'm like, no, but I'm a lawyer. He goes, well, don't talk like that to a jury either. You have to talk like a normal person in front of a jury.
Right. So something as simple as that, you need to be told.
Yes.
Yeah. And once you hear it, you say, okay, I got it.
And then I'm like, what's this guy now? And then I looked him up, and he's this big time, criminal
Right.
defense lawyer in New
Right.
York. It was funny.
Right.
So you want to take us through, you're there for 11 years as
11
dean?
years, yeah.
And then you stay on, you're still teaching, but at some point do you go back into private practice?
Yeah. What happened is I decided after I had given in the beginning of my 11th year, I had given the incoming class my welcoming speech. And walking back to my office after having done this 11 times and having looked at what I had set out to do, I literally, walking back to my office, decided this is going to be my last year because I've done what I wanted to do, and I don't want to continue to give the same incoming or substantially the same incoming address.
Mm-hmm.
So then I decided that I would leave as the dean, but continue to teach, and then also begin to practice. Because what was happening is while I was the dean, I was beginning to do pro bono mediations. The federal courts would call me all the time. Can you do this? Can you do that? And I did, and I never didn't bill it because it was a service to the court.
Is being the dean something of a statesman in the law? I get the sense that you're almost like a statesman in the state and the surrounding area.
I never sided with any law firm.
Yeah.
I kept neutral.
Yeah.
From any law firm. Yeah, and you're kind of like a judge.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time. That's a good term for it.
Yeah. So that was part of the function. But then I was beginning to get approached by law firms when I announced that I was no longer going to continue as dean. I was actually approached by John Gibbons, may he rest in peace, who was the chief judge of the Third Circuit. John was also teaching at Seton Hall Law School. There was an opening on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. We talked about that a little bit. And then when I found out what was involved in that, I didn't want to pursue it because to me it was too confining.
Kind of a cloistered existence,
Very,
right?
very.
Being an appellate judge.
Very. And then a couple of law firms approached me, and then Ed Deutsch, who was my lifelong friend in the law, had started his own firm. It was McElroy Deutsch. It was a growing firm. And Ed and I had a conversation about joining the firm. So I did, and one of the first things I ended up doing was to handle the Middletown teachers' strike. I don't know if Jerry might remember it.
So teachers were getting jailed.
Teachers, I was down in Florida, and Judge Fisher, great judge, he was the chancery judge in Freehold.
Clarkson Fisher, yeah.
Biff.
Great guy.
Biff. Biff worked at my old firm. So he called me and said, Ron, he goes, there's 228 teachers in jail. He says, I can't keep putting them in jail. We got to find a way to get this resolved. He said, and they've agreed that if a person to everybody's liking would mediate the dispute, that they would all go back to work. So I mediated that teacher strike and was able to get that resolved.
Wow.
Then at the same time, or shortly after, I was appointed by a federal judge in Syracuse.
I'm going to cut you off because I just want to show my research knowledge to mediate a 270,000 acre land dispute with the Oneida.
Yeah. This was a great experience. the Oneida Indian Nation had 3 different segments. One in Green Bay, Wisconsin,
Go Pack Go.
another in London, Ontario, and another in Oneida, New York. And the United States Supreme Court decided a case which said that the Oneida Nation had standing to pursue claims to 275,000 acres of land in upstate New York on which were located people and businesses who had been there for decades.
Wow.
So you could imagine the friction that existed between the Oneidas and the landowners. People who were living there for decades were now had their title under a cloud. So my assignment was to resolve the dispute. And it was extreme. I used to go up to Syracuse regularly, and I would be met at the airport by a sheriff from Oneida County and a sheriff from Madison County because I needed security, because there was hostility between the people and the Oneidas. And part of the problem was the Oneidas owned gas stations that had slot machines in them. And if you were not in the Oneidas, you would have a gas station across the street and nobody would be going there for gas. And you'd all be going for the Oneida gas station because the prices were lower and you could play the slot machine.
They could lower the price of gas based on the
They were an independent nation. They were a sovereign nation.
Okay.
They had their own police force, their own security, and so forth. So I spent almost probably 2 years on that. And I gained a profound respect for Indian culture, or as they corrected me from time to time,
Native American.
not even that, original people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Original people, and it was a matriarchal system. And when I went up to London, Ontario, they were the poorest of the 3 Oneidas, and they took the position that they were the keepers of the flame. So I went up there, and they had a welcoming ceremony for me, and they did their business in what was known as a longhouse. Wow. And they would have 2 big pot-belly stoves on either end. And I went up there in August, so it was hot as could be. But the opening night, they had a welcoming ceremony for me. And they didn't have much to give, but they gave me whatever they had. And after we ate, out came an ensemble, an ensemble, not an assemble, an ensemble of musicians in their decorative, original people garments. And they played some songs, and then as they're playing the music, this line forms, and you could call it a conga line, but it wasn't a conga line. But they're going in sort of shuffling fashion around each of the potbelly stoves. And I'm watching this, and I had my own guide with me, one of the members of the nation, and one of the elder women came up to me, and I can remember she was missing a lot of teeth, and she said to me, "We want you to join the group." And I said, I don't even dance with my wife.
Dance, yeah.
You know, and the guide gives me a nudge. He said, if you want to have any influence with him, you better get up there.
Yeah.
So for the next hour, there I was, sweating, going around, with the group, and it was almost an out-of-body experience. It was something like you would see in the movie, and I kept thinking to myself, what opportunities you have as a lawyer, what experiences you have.
Yeah.
Who could have ever imagined that here I would be in London, Ontario, in the middle of August on an Indian reservation.
It's like out of a movie.
It was out of a movie.
But I want to know if at the end of this successful mediation you smoked the peyote
I did not
peace
do that.
pipe. The peace
I did
pipe.
not, that didn't no. That I didn't do, but a lot of them did.
Yeah.
And the incidents of alcoholism and drug abuse,
I did my law school note on that topic and how difficult it is to prosecute violent crimes on Native American reservations because there's such an interplay between, is it the tribal police, the federal police, the local police, just the vast amounts of land that people need to cover.
One of the glaring omissions in college, law school, high school curriculum is the experience of the American Indians, especially in New York State, the so-called Iroquois Confederacy, and how the European settlers just kept pushing them further and further west, and it destroyed their culture, it destroyed their land, their religious beliefs. I mean, look at the Oneidas. They were one community, and they're now three. How did that happen? It happened because they got pushed out.
It's a great book by this guy, Jack Weatherford, called Indian Givers, that talks about how much we as a country and society have actually taken from Native Americans without even realizing it. Everything from our system of Congress, all these different ideas.
The Constitution itself, parts of it are based on the Iroquois Confederacy.
100%. Yeah. So we've got, all right, so you're dancing with the Oneida. Right. You've got another case I know you really want to talk about. It was fascinating to me, the very unfortunate shooting in Newark. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's then post your career as dean, right?
Yes. Yeah. I was at McElroy at the time.
By the way, I just have to say, and this is not patronizing, I've dealt with McElroy over the years. First of all, it's amazing how Ed Deutsch grew that firm from whatever it was, 10 lawyers to, I guess, over 200 now. Right. And I always found they have a great culture there. I've never had a problem with, and I've had a lot of cases with those lawyers there. They're on the defense side, in my experience, and we have the plaintiff side. But there's a really good culture there. They're very like down to earth people, but also really good lawyers and very professional and personable to deal with, I have to say. And there's different cultures at different firms. Some of the firms they can be more stuck up, so to speak, for lack of a better term. But I always liked the culture and professionalism at McElroy.
Well, I appreciate that, and it really starts with Ed as the founder, and Jim Mulvaney, who's sadly isn't with us anymore. But Ed and Jim started out, and they did something that no other lawyers that I know in my 55 years of being a lawyer have been able to accomplish. They started out, in the basement sitting on boxes together and grew it into what it is today, which is one of the premier law firms in the state and in the region. Yeah. But that culture comes from the top.
So let's end this with this fascinating story about this unfortunate, but this school.
So my secretary at the law school while I was teaching, her name was Lillian, and Lillian had a photo on her desk of her niece, who was a majorette in a Newark high school, and over one weekend, Lillian tragically passes away. So I was asked to speak at her memorial service on Springfield Avenue in Newark. I was a little apprehensive because it's an all-black community, and I had never done that before. I've given eulogies before, but
pull the mic a little closer to you.
Yeah,
just so that everyone can hear you better.
This is a little different. This was a little different. So I went to the service and I gave my remarks, and I was followed by a young man who was dazzling. He was 18 years old. He was an ordained minister and could quote the Bible better than
the Secretary of Defense?
Better than the Secretary. Yes. Much better, by the way. And his name was Terrence. And I said to the people that were sitting with me that this Terrence is going to really become something someday. So about 2 or 3 months later, I'm reading the Star Ledger, and on the cover page, I read about the shooting in the schoolyard in Newark. And it has the photo of the 4 victims. And I look at 2 of the victims, and it looks like my secretary's niece, whose photo I recognized, had been on my secretary's desk, and the young man who spoke after me, Terrence. And I was stunned, right? How could you not be? And I thought nothing of it afterwards, other than to feel badly about it. And then about 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my office at the law school, and I see this woman come down the hall who looks just like my secretary. And turns out it was her sister, who was the mother of the young girl whose photo was on my secretary's desk. And she said to me, I'm Lillian's sister. And Lillian told me that if I ever needed anything, to go see Dean Riccio. So I had her come in. She told me what had happened. It was very emotional. And they had no money to bury the kids. So I looked into the Victims' Compensation Fund and did file some papers. And as they're telling me the story of what happened, it turned out that the four kids had started out, it was a summer night, it started out in the park, but the park closed at 10 o'clock. And the four kids had just finished working that day, and they were getting ready to start school, to go back to school at Delaware State. So they decided to go from the park to the schoolyard, because they thought the schoolyard would be a safe place with lighting and so forth. So they drove their car into the schoolyard, and they're eating their dinner at 10:30 at night, and there were two guys sitting in the bleachers. And they acknowledged each other. And as the night goes on, about 6 other kids come in through the schoolyard gate. And Terrence, spotting this, immediately senses something bad's going to happen. They try to get into the car and get away, and they can't. So the 4 kids get pulled out of the car, and originally they think it's just going to be a robbery of the car, but it turns out, in retrospect, that it's an MS-13 initiation. So they take 3 of the kids, and they take them off to a corner of the schoolyard, and butcher them with machetes, and then shoot them. One of the persons doesn't go down with the other 3, is lying on the ground, and they shoot her in the head, and she survived miraculously. So when I hear this story, I decided to look into the schoolyard. What was going on in the schoolyard that this could happen? Well, it turns out that there's no lighting. The surveillance cameras are broken. There's gang graffiti all over the place, and the fence is open. And 2 weeks before, there's an email to a Newark councilman saying, "You better make sure that these gates are closed. This is a crime waiting to happen." So I decided that we needed to file a tort claims notice and to put people on notice of what happened here. And it got ignored. I then filed a lawsuit, and to the everlasting credit of McElroy Deutsch, they took on this case, which I don't think anybody would have taken on, because we're going to get nothing from the murderers, and we're trying to get money from the state under the Tort Claims Act, which is hard to do. And the argument was that this was a known dangerous property condition that they did nothing about. And we litigated that case. It went to trial for several weeks, and we eventually settled it. All of the family members got a substantial amount of money, and Natasha, the survivor, received a substantial amount of money. And during the course of that case, we used to have to give them car fare to come to meet with me in Newark. And I would always order a big lunch. And they would take home the leftovers. But before every lunch, one of them would spontaneously say grace before meals.
Yeah.
It was so moving, so emotional, so meaningful that, you know, when you talk about making an impact on people, that was it. When we put in for a fee application, it wasn't totally pro bono, but when I tell you how many hours we spent, 18,000 hours that McElroy firm put into the case.
Yeah.
And the judge who presided over the settlement said on the record that he doesn't think there would be another law firm in the state that would have taken this case. So, you know, people say to me when sports betting opened, they said, I guess this is the biggest case, most important case you ever had.
Yeah.
And my answer always was, it's not even close.
Yeah.
That was the one.
I worked, I have a case with Michael Morone from your office, and I remember we were at a motion, and he had come in just off the trial or in the middle of the trial or something. He was kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
He's a good guy, too, and a real good lawyer.
A great lawyer. And Mike was the lead trial attorney.
Yeah.
In that case. I was helping, but I was also, I was teaching at the time. Yes. Wow. I was still teaching at the time. But in any event, you know, that was probably the most meaningful case to me.
Yeah.
Just because of the way it happened. And the idea that Lillian would say to her sister, go see Dean Riccio. I mean, what a tribute, right?
Yeah, it's cool. Did they catch the murderers at all?
Oh, yeah. They were all
good.
captured. I went to all of the sentencings.
Yeah.
They were like animals. No remorse whatsoever.
Were they MS-13?
Oh, definitely, MS-13.
So I don't know if this is politically correct or not, but were they Hispanic?
Yeah, they were from
Central or South America.
El Salvador, I believe, is where they were from.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, but there was no remorse. I mean, they were cocky as could be. But Natasha spoke at. Natasha was the survivor. She spoke at all of the sentencings.
Yeah.
And I mean, she really let them have it.
Yeah.
She was. The interesting thing about Natasha is when we would get together, she would never talk about it. She was very reticent to talk about what happened. But we put her on the witness stand, and boy, did she tell the story.
Yeah.
She heard her brother and her two best friends being murdered. She heard that. And then she was shot in the head.
That's just like evil. I
mean, it is. It was evil.
It's just terrible.
Yes, definitely.
Ooh, well, I don't want to end on a low note.
I was going to say, you usually say not to gild the lily, and I was going to.
We should have put that one in the middle.
It's actually, it's not a low note. In some ways, it's a high note because it's the resilience of an individual, the survivor, to not walk away from her brother and her love and her friends, and to have the courage to go through what she went through.
Yeah.
And also, it's also to attribute, not to me, but to the firm for be willing to back me up on it, which they did. Yeah. At a huge financial cost.
Yeah.
All right, so let's you're right. Let's end with something a little. You've got years of private practice, over a decade as dean. What kind of advice do you have for the legal field in general, new attorneys, people coming out of law school, thinking of going to law school?
Be a good person. Treat others the way you want others to treat you. Make a positive impact on other people if you can. Be prepared all the time. Be persons of integrity. Be proud to be lawyers. Don't succumb to the temptation to pursue money at the expense of other values. And basically understand that we're a service profession. That the clients aren't here to serve us, we're here to serve them. The minute you start thinking that clients owe us something is the minute you're going in the wrong direction. That would be my approach to it.
Cool. That's awesome. Dean Ron Riccio, Professor Ron Riccio, thank you. We really appreciate you coming on and your service to the state.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.